Salutations, you are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CDH. I am your host, Reid, aka Sick Robot, and today I'm joined by Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going, everyone?
In this episode, we're going to be covering the most catastrophic event to CDH ever, as is defined by, I guess, the general CDH community, and more specifically CDH Twitter at large. The new banlist announcement. We'll just say now, I guess this is the banlist announcement that includes Dockside Extortionist, Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, and Nadu Winged Wisdom for the Commander format. So that's going to be a fun one to talk about. And I'm not sure that we have much to talk about before then. We're sort of recording this one on short notice. It is currently September the 23rd in our time zone, the day of the banlist. And it's pretty new, so I think we probably want to get talking about it, huh?
Yeah, I think we can probably just jump into this one.
Move right in. Alrighty. Sick. So yeah, big banlist, massive one. Would you like to do the gut check at the start of the episode, Morgan?
Sure. Yeah, let's. As long as
Great.
We're skipping our normal segments, we might as well rearrange the whole podcast too. I'll just try.
Yeah, exactly.
You try all the new things at once, and then you have no idea which ones worked and which ones didn't.
One of them will work. Well, the one that I wanted to work obviously was the one that worked. So anyway,
glad to hear it.
Gut check for this week is how do you feel about the ban list?
I'm so happy. And I've honestly
I'm also very happy.
Felt a little weird because, boy, so many people are so unhappy, and I'm like sitting here like dancing.
This is great. This is everything that I asked for. This is everything that I've been asking
almost
for,
everything. That
5 years. Yeah, we missed a couple, but I guess we'll get into those a bit. Actually, you know what? No, I think that's probably a good start. Let's just talk about the ban list first and like sort of the cards on it, and then we'll talk about sort of, like alterations that could have been made that we might have made to ban list and such. Cool. So I think probably, let's start with we should probably start with I feel like we should start with the oldest one, right? The one that's stuck around for the longest.
Yeah, probably. That seems
yeah.
Let's like a big one.
Let's talk about Crypt. Crypt is a weird one. I'm not gonna lie. It's weird to see. First of all, incredibly weird to basically hear nothing from the rules committee for years, and then it's just we're banning 4 things. Okay, go take this. Crypt is a strange one, especially without its companion piece, Soaring. I think the general assumption is that, if we were, especially, going back, I feel like the hypotheticals were always man, if we could ban, the fast mana, we would absolutely ban, whoever was talking about it at the time, absolutely, oh, sure, if they ban Mana Crypt, they should absolutely, ban, Mana Crypt and Soaring, just, get them out of the format. But I feel like, for a long time, even now, forever, people have, very, very much associated Mana Crypt with the identity of CDH, to the degree that I think Soaring is associated with regular EDH, right?
Yeah. So this is kind of a weird thing, and I do think it is, especially noteworthy that it sounds absurd to say that Mana Crypt wasn't banned for power level, because obviously that's
it is possible. Among the best cards in the format, Mana Crypt is
it's arguably the best card in the format.
Arguably the best single card in the format. Yeah.
I saw some people sort of arguing. So there's interesting questions. It is materially better than Soul. That
absolutely
is true. Their reasoning on the article was that you could play 2 rocks turn 1 instead of 1. I don't think that was
yeah. That was really the issue.
The difference between land Sol Ring Rock and land Crypt Rock is, I mean, it's 1 mana on the next turn. The huge upside is that you can cast a spell with a colored mana pip on turn 1 with a mana crypt. Like, you can cast a spell that costs 2 in a blue, or 2 in a black, or whatever.
Or 2 in a red.
Yeah. And that is a meaningful difference. However...
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I don't think that's why it was banned. I think it was banned because Mana Crypt is like a signaling card.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've had a very similar opinion of this, even though it wasn't explicitly stated, of like, I think even with these like quote unquote CDH oriented bans, I think there's still like a bunch of that previous ban philosophy, which is that like we're not banning to actually manage the format, we're banning as signposts for like what you shouldn't be doing.
So I think it's important to note, these are like, I don't think these are actually CEDH targeted bans.
That is true.
Because if we look at the timeline, like, first of all, there's a statement from Jim, I think it was posted in the Commander RC Discord, but it might have been somewhere else. I just saw the screenshot of it, where it said, I promise you the bans in Commander have a longer discussion and debate period than the 3 weeks it's been since the CEDH RC situation at the end of August. We've been talking about these bans with each other, with Wizards, so they can do their own communications and align bans with PGO for a little over a year now. The timing is unfortunate, but if you're reading anti-CEDH intent here, you're reading something that's not there. So, I mean, given the insights we've been given into how the RC banned stuff in the past, I did not think that these bans came, like, in the last month. And, like, went from conceptual to implemented in the span of a month. Like, the RC moves at a pretty glacial pace. But if you remember what kicked off the whole CDH RC situation, was Jim made a statement that people interpreted as saying, the RC's not banning for CDH, we're never going to ban for CDH, so if you guys want bans, you have to, make your own rules committee, blackjack and hookers. And so, I mean, putting those two things together, it seems like these were bans they wanted to do for casual, and Jim was essentially giving a tip of like, hey, you guys might want to start organizing. Isn't for you guys. Because there are bans coming down the pipeline that might be extremely unpopular among CEDH players. So if you want to do something about it, you're going to have to make your own RC. And, like, I really do think the reasoning is for casual play. And I think it's, like... I think that Mana Crypt is banned because Mana Crypt is a card you play... This isn't how I see the world, but I think this is how the RC sees the world. It's a card you play when you want to win, not when you want to have fun. Like, we can get into the whole heavy gamer, light gamer, winning is fun, yada yada. Everyone wants to win, but
whatever.
Like, the way they frame it is, if you're putting Mana Crypt in your deck, it's like, it's not making the deck more interesting, it's not leaning into the deck's themes or design or whatever. It's just a straight power level boost. And so I think sort of clipping the heels of the ways people tend to pub stomp their playgroups or their, like, LGS or whatever, I think is the idea here. Of, like...
Yeah.
You don't want someone, like, who's just willing to spend the money just showing up with, like... you can have a deck that's not playing, like, CEDH combos or like, the really efficient win cons, but it's just, like, full of good cards that let it run smoother than...
Yeah, and, like, when it has the Mana Crypt in the opening hand, whoops.
Yeah. So I do get that, sort of, and, like, Sol Ring just doesn't have that signal. It doesn't send the signal the same way that Mana Crypt does, because it's in every precon, so everyone has like a drawer full of soul rings.
It's also, this is like weirdly reminiscent as well to the play DH problem, like the play DH mid power problem of like, yeah, if it has a Mana Crypt in it, it's not mid power, and people just not be able to comprehend that. And I think that like that whole misunderstanding is a big reason why it caught the axe here. Like that sort of, I feel like that extrapolates out to the rest of the EDH community pretty nicely.
Yeah.
Of like, people just not understanding that like, yeah, Mana Crypt in a deck means that it's just going to like operate way higher than its power level a decent bit of the time.
Yeah, and like you can't
level.
just like when you're trying to create a fun gameplay experience, you can't just average out the performance of your deck. Like,
yeah.
Because it's not fun for people when you sit there and do nothing and just get rolled, and it's not fun when you roll people. So, like, having your deck, even if the win rate was, like, fair, because it ran hot a quarter of the time and just absolutely crushed everyone, and then the rest of the time was terrible, that doesn't make a good gameplay experience, and that's Mana Crypt in a nutshell. Or you're just playing a deck that's stronger than your opponents when it has Mana Crypt, and either evenly balanced or a little bit stronger when it doesn't. And, like, so it's either you're using it to try and fix a problem. You're trying to fix a problem in the aggregate, but it makes miserable gameplay experiences, or you're just using it to get an advantage.
Neither of which are great experiences for anybody at the other side of the table. That being said, I mean, would I have liked a Soul Ring ban along with this one? Yes. Am I still happy that we got some of this kind of variance out of the format? Also, yes.
So, I mean, in a vacuum, I would agree. I would definitely agree that, like, I would like to see Soul Ring go with it. However, I do think from, like, a community management perspective...
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Like, there would be actual riots.
Yeah. I think, sorry, yeah. A lot of my opinions on these bands are going to be colored by, like, they're going to be, they're not, sorry, colored. It's more that, like, they're just in the context of, like, what they look like for me playing CDH. And not so much for general, like, format implications, which I think we can probably talk more about, like, generally when we get through the entire list and sort of get through talking more about, like, the holistic impact of a lot of this stuff. But, yeah. Cool. Next big one. Let's talk about the big thorn in the sides for a long time. Dockside? Oh, man, am I happy to see that one go. It's, like, 3 years too late. I definitely agree with the general, I think Caleb Durward tweeted about it, but I think there's just like a good like general consensus, which is that Dockside should have been banned way earlier, and being banned this late is sort of shitty because it like hasn't really fundamentally changed. It's just sort of become more and more apparent over time. But yeah, I guess better late than never. That might be debatable, but I certainly think that it's for the best of the long-term health of the format that this one leaves.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've seen a lot of people who have sort of had the take that, like, Dockside was keeping fringe decks in the format. And there's definitely, like, some truth to that. We'll get into that when we go into decks specifically. But I also, I mean, I think it was also keeping a lot of decks out of the format, and like I think there's a bit of a failure of imagination of people,
for sure.
Where like what are these? Are there decks that were like kept in the format to the point where, like, you know, if we look at sort of the most successful tournament decks, they were hit but not like wiped out, and people are sort of voicing
not killed,
voicing
broadly
concerns that like, well, now a bunch of the stuff below them was reliant on Dockside, and so like what's gonna happen to that stuff? And the answer is a lot of those decks are pretty dead. But like, what about the stuff, if the top moves down a bit, and then the stuff that was immediately below the top falls away, the stuff that was immediately below that, like, still fills the same role. And I think, like, we're gonna see...
there's, like, some number of decks as well that, like, get actively better because of this ban list that, like, previously weren't really filling those slots, but very realistically could move up to fill those slots as well.
Yeah, like a Trax Grand...
Or, like, Sithis. Think about Sithis. There's no Dockside to punish it anymore.
I have never thought about Sithis in my life, and I don't intend to start now, okay?
You lie. I swear I've played that deck on stream.
You've played that deck against me.
And yet you've never thought of it.
True.
True. Yeah, but, like, sorry, joking aside, first of all, Sithis, fantastic deck. Not in tournament play. Please don't bring Sithis to tournaments. But I'm
also
very
not in casual
yeah,
play.
There's
or
yeah, probably not that. But there are a lot of decks where they really, like, Dockside on the other side of the table was a very large issue. And now that that's no longer a thing, they have a lot more room to work with. And there's a lot of those decks have, like, very interesting patterns of attack and, like, things that, like, axes of attack, and potentially have room to hate on the big meta stuff. Anyway, sorry, I think I cut Morgan off of a point at the start of that entire rant.
Was mostly,
okay.
I'm in agreement. I think we're gonna see
moving in a similar direction.
It's a brave new world.
And I think there are a couple of things that I sort of wanted to address here. I think the big one that I keep seeing is people being concerned that this is going to affect the ability for the player in seat 4 to win. Like, keep up in win percentage rather than just be, like, dumpster to, like, 10 or whatever percentage. I have a bit of a problem with that. I think the big one being that, like, you shouldn't be forced to play a certain color in order to, like, not have abysmal seat positioning. Just broadly, I think that it's, like, sort of shitty that, like, if you didn't want to play, like, if you wanted to mitigate the seat 4 stuff, which, like, you had to find the Dockside, it wasn't, like, completely free, but if you wanted to, like, mitigate seat 4 curse, you just had to be playing red, and more specifically, you had to be playing a red Dockside deck that could actually take advantage of Dockside and, like, wasn't, playing null rods or, like, things that, like, torpor orbs or whatever wide variety of things that, like, Dockside doesn't really want to play along nicely with. And also, I don't think it actually mitigated that win rate, like, as much as people think it did. I'm sure there are stats out there that probably contradict me on this front, but, like, I think seat 4 has just always sucked, and Dockside maybe hid that a bit. But I think that, like, Dockside was never the solution for that. And it being gone might, like, help to unmask some of that issue a bit more and actually push us towards, like, real solutions for, like, seating structuring or, like, like that, like, seating shuffling or whatever, like, custom tournament rules people eventually come up with. I think there's just more encouragement to go seek those out now.
Yeah, I mean, we had the data to suggest that no matter what Dockside was doing to mitigate that issue, it definitely wasn't enough, right? Like, C4's win rate was like 14% or something. I think the last stats I saw, it was the most likely outcome. Like, player 1 had like a 25% win rate, and then it was like 21 for player 2, and then 20% was draws, and then it was player 3 and player 4. Yeah. So, like player 1 was, like,
just really did
barely above 25%, and then 20% of matches were ending in draws, and that was better than, like, it was more likely the game ended in a draw than the person in seat 3 or seat 4 won. So, like, I think, yeah, even if Dockside was insulating, let's say, against that problem, it's still very much a problem that needs, like, an actual solution, not sort of
band-aid that didn't even really close the wound at all.
Really doing much to staunch the bleeding.
just sort of putting a band-aid on a compound fracture, really.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we'll like, I don't actually think the numbers will get that much worse, because also, like, the reality is, when are these, like, Dockside is better on turn 2 in seat 1 than it is on turn 1 in seat 4, right?
Seat 4, yeah.
Like, what's the argument that, like, is the argument really that, like, Dockside isn't good enough until precisely seat 4 turn 1? Like, what if one of the seats before you isn't playing a rock heavy deck and, like, one of them only plays 1, like, or is it like are we talking about like a turn 2 seat 4 Dockside?
Yeah, and also, like, if you're playing a Dockside deck and you're also playing, like, it's a Dockside Rocks deck, then you're contributing to seat 1's Dockside being better as well. Like, after you passed your first turn.
And
so it's just like...
And, like, because, I don't know, I feel like, unless you're actually just playing in, like, the meta that is just, like, all Grixis X decks, I feel like your turn 1 Dockside's, like, generously making 5, probably 4. So then it's like a slightly harder to cast, but more flexible to spend Dark Ritual.
You're like Seething Song or something. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know. I mean, it's obviously like a lot better than Seething Song.
Yeah.
I think
much better than Seething Song.
Like Dockside for 4
in a lot of cases, but
Dockside for 4 same turn is like arguably better or worse than Dark Ritual, because it's obviously harder to cast, but more flexible
harder
to spend
to cast,
before.
But yeah, better.
Like,
and you can bank it.
Banking it makes it better, but like
yeah.
If we're talking about the recovery rate of like how does it get you back into the game, I feel like playing it on turn 1 and then banking treasures is not how Dockside is bringing you back into the game.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I think there's also just like, I don't know, there's just the pressures are different as well now with like knowing that your opponents don't have Dockside, so like you're not like super afraid to run out rocks now, whereas like before, like that's another thing where like it's not even necessarily a great catch-up mechanic, is because like a lot of the time you just like don't run out an entire hand. I mean, a lot of the time you do, but there are definitely a decent number of situations where you're just like, I'm just not going to play into Dockside yet. I can afford to hold on to this, so I will. And then by the time Dockside's good, we're at like turn 3, and the percentage points have equalized. I think more than Dockside alone equalizes percentage points across seats. So I forget what the bleed looks like, but I think full
the advantage back
equalization at like turn 4, turn 5 or something.
The data's like very out of date.
Yeah, it's also hard to like. It wasn't particularly
the metagame
great
project,
data.
But I think there was still a material advantage on turn 3, and it was a lot more average on turn 4 and after.
In turn 4, yeah. Anyway,
which like makes sense, because I feel like very few decks are still looking to just like to do tap out for setup on turn 3, but there's a lot that would really like to be able to get away with it on
turn 2, yeah, for sure. Anyway, that is all to say, I think that concern is a bit of a fake one. Maybe it's not like super fake, but even if it isn't, I think that like, even if it is a material downside in the short term, I think that's still a long-term benefit, because it means that we're actually encouraged to go solve that issue rather than just relying on card printings. Yeah, so I think that's about where we're at with Dockside. It's also just nice to, not be forced to play Oof as your primary stacks anymore either, so it's just nice to open up a bit of space in that front, but I think that one's a bit more ephemeral and sort of hard to predict, so we'll just see where that one goes. I think the last like really big one on the ban list is the rest of the big 3 here, which is Jeweled Lotus. If you have followed the podcast for a while, you might know that we have opinions on Jeweled Lotus. Morgan specifically has strong opinions on Jeweled Lotus. Mine follow not too far behind. Yeah. Do you want to do the rant, or do you want to let me get a preliminary explanation in because I know exactly what the
I trust you. You can do it.
what the discussions here. Okay. Yeah, like the issue here is that so broadly, why do people like Jewel Lotus? People like Jewel Lotus because it lets you cast your 7 mana commander for effectively 4 mana. It is a literal Black Lotus for your commander. It assumedly makes your like expensive commanders way easier to cast, and it lets you get like 3 mana commanders down immediately, like a snap like that. The big concern that I'm seeing a lot with the banning of Jewel Lotus in terms of gameplay is that people are really concerned that their expensive commanders aren't going to be viable anymore. Because again, like it's the encouragement presumably is in the right place here with Jewel Lotus. It's not great for 2 mana commanders. It's not great for a lot of 3 mana commanders even because they're usually split in colors or so. You're not getting full value out of it, but it's really good for the fatter commanders. And Lord knows we have enough good cheap commanders already. So why not make the big fat like big commanders even better? That's sort of like honestly, it's sort of an argument that I've seen made about Crypt and Dockside as well. Crypt the least so, Dockside a bit, mostly Jewel Lotus. The issue with this is that it doesn't actually make those like having Jewel Lotus in the format and having Jewel Lotus in your deck where it's the same discussion we were having as Crypt and Casual, just scaling this up to CDH in a bit of a different situation where you're not averaging. Sorry, you're technically averaging your deck better, but it's not like every hand gets better, or even like half of your hands are better for having this in your deck. It's you're like 10% of your hands are better, or whatever percent of hands have the Jewel Lotus in them are much better and make your deck functional. And then when you don't have the Jewel Lotus in your hand and you can't find it, you are not playing a commander effectively. Like this is a big reason why Atraxa like fell off, among other reasons. Big reason why Atraxa fell off is that people realized, oh yeah, the 80% of the time when I don't have a Jewel Lotus, like don't have a literal Black Lotus for my commander, it is a 7 mana commander, and I'm not getting up to casting it anytime soon. Like anytime in a reasonable period of time. I'm just playing with a whatever control finisher, and my opening 7 has just got to do it. And I just gotta hope that the opening 7 does it.
Yeah, and we definitely
like that's not a healthy play pattern.
Yeah, we definitely saw a shift more and more in those decks of like becoming very mid range. Like they were putting in,
like
they're like looking
like
for
Alice Nord and like
value engines to put out, and like lots of. I feel like that was a big one for like main deck Talion. Just like anything they can do to like play the game. And then, cast the commander as an afterthought. And which is why I feel like actually the deck that, like, the thing that is maybe going to be quieter, but is actually going to be, like, a huge hit is Crom. Because, like, there was a time when people didn't play Crom. And I know that some people will say, like, oh, that's just because people
that seems insane.
Figured out what was good. But, like, it was a very different meta. People were playing decks that were much more likely to actually not be able to feed Crom. But also, like...
Or just had the ability to just say that I don't want to feed Crom.
Yeah, but also, like, there was no Jewel Lotus. I mean, for a time there was also no Dockside. But no Jewel Lotus, like... Paying 5 mana for Crom is a nice option to have in your back pocket, but, like, Tymna Crom was not at all reliant on Crom, and that's why you saw a lot of games where they didn't have the Jewel Lotus, they just, like, didn't cast the Crom, right? Like, unless the game just went really long or they had, like, some other huge mana engine. It was pretty common to see Crom just not come down, and... that's fine when your deck is Tymna Crom and you have Tymna and also your deck is just like disgusting strong mid-range cards. That's a lot less fine when your deck is like built around the really expensive thing that you're trying to cast off of it. Like this is like the Tivit and Atraxa.
Atraxa, Atali.
Argument, and then there's like the 2 mana the other thing that it was huge for was like the 2 color 4 cost commanders.
Yes, yeah.
And like that was just purely like the mana crypt mid range problem of like,
Yeah,
hey, guess what? When you
high
can't cast
roll.
Grand Arbiter on turn 1 or turn 2, the deck still sucks. And like the occasional time you get it down turn 1 on the play off your Jeweled Lotus, like just creates, I mean, I guess you're less concerned about a bad gameplay experience. But like it's not a healthy it's certainly not like a healthy place for decks like that to be in, where they're just trying to like high roll out their commander and like that's the game plan.
Yeah,
and if they don't
like
have that, they're
and yeah, where like the deltas are incredibly large between gameplay. Oh, I guess Kodama as well, huh? We did not talk about this pre-show either. It just popped into my mind. So that's a big one. No Crypt, no Jewel Lotus.
I mean,
Anyway,
first of all, do people play Kodama? Second of all,
no.
I feel like
yeah.
well, it depends on what type of Kodama deck you're talking about. I think if you're looking at like the Abzan Kodama stuff, like you're fine there because you have like big meta dorks and you're generally trying to take the game on anyways. If you're looking at like Sakashima Kodama, yeah, it's pretty tough.
A bit of a toughie, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think Jewel Lotus is another one of those ones where it's like it's been too long. Although I will say I don't think I think like you can be angry at the Commander RC for the banning of Jewel Lotus here. I think those feelings are warranted, but all blame goes at Wizards here, right? They printed basically like a card that should have never. So Jewel Lotus should have never been printed. It is a design mistake. I think like even people who are like playing big decks or think that it's crucial for big decks to exist can admit that like Jewel Lotus is a design mistake. It's just like not the right way to go about that at all.
Well, so okay, I do think there is an argument to hold the RC at least more responsible, and it'll also in part indirectly responsible for the printing of Jewel Lotus, because
sure,
I genuinely I think that Jewel Lotus was only ever printable in a world where people like it was only ever printable in a world where people bought the RC's line about how Commander games tend to like play out. Yeah. And I think that line was 10 years out of date when Jewel Lotus was printed.
That's fair. But also, you have to know, like, as Wizards, like, you have to know that, like, you're printing this card, you have influence over the RC. They couldn't ban it even if they wanted to when it came out, right? This isn't like
no, they couldn't. Like, I was gonna say, well, they pre-banned
like, there's just
Tree,
not
but it's
a world.
Like, it wasn't a Commander product. It's not a card designed for Commander.
Jewel Lotus was the most desirable card in that entire set, and there was a lot of good stuff in that set that like people really wanted for Commander. Most desirable card in that set by far. Obviously, the set's economics were built around being able to push Jewel Lotuses. Like the RC just can't ban that on release, or like even like a year after the fact. Like even that's sketchy. You're gonna be in like the bad books with Wizards for however long. So like there's definitely squarely blame here. Like there's issues with the RC being like effectively subservient to play design and Wizards generally, which is like not great for an ostensibly independent entity. But like yeah, Wizards printing an unbannable card effect, like a card that you cannot ban, is like rough.
I would love to know, because like we learned, I think it was with the spoiling of the Mother of Machines Elesh Norn, the Torpor panel one. We learned that the RC gets shown cards early.
Yeah.
I have to wonder what they said
about Jewel Lotus.
When they showed, because like it would not shock me to learn that they said, for the love of God, please don't. But it also wouldn't shock me if they said, yeah, I think this would be cool and help people play their high color commander. And that's
high CMC commanders, yeah.
what did I say? Oh, hi.
Color.
Sorry, yeah, high CMC commanders.
Yeah, you got it.
And like, boy, yeah, that like, I don't know, I feel like this I feel weird being like we were right the whole time, but I feel like the problem is the problem that we describe, like the problem we're describing now and the reason it was banned seems to line up with the problem we described when the card was spoiled.
Yeah, it is not substantially different from however many years ago it was when we first saw it. But yeah, I think, again, net positive. I don't think that one should have existed. And I think that cleaning it up now, better late than never, still. I think that, like, it's, unfortunately, these bans do have large impacts, but, like, they're, again, better for the long-term health of the format.
Yeah,
and then we get to the last one here on the list.
I'm looking at the website with the ban announcement. It says, another card that can give you 5 mana on turn 2, Jeweled Lotus does it without even needing a good hand. Though you're restricted in what you can do with the mana, 4 and 5 mana commanders can pack a significant punch nowadays. Often draw cards to make up for the one-shot mana, and defensive abilities such as Ward can't be interacted with that early in the game. Like, is the implication of that line is that in 2020, 4 and 5 mana commanders didn't pack a punch. And I don't agree with that framing. And I think
I might disagree with that framing.
I'm gonna say.
Yeah. Last one on the list for this ban list was Nadu Winged Wisdom. This one was a good ban. Great nip in the bud here. Deserved it, I think. Not necessarily on power level reasons, but certainly for play patterns reasons. I mean, like, I imagine this was banned in very much the same vein that Crawford and Crufix and Paradox Engine were banned in, where it's just one person monopolizing game actions kind of thing.
Classic. Was it Paradox Engine was proof of work omniscience. Nadu was just proof of work Enter the Infinite.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it's I think it's unfortunate for the CDH meta because it was sort of an interesting one to have around, and I mean, obviously design mistake, but bypassing Bowmasters for a blue-green creature based combo deck is sort of interesting design space, and it had some resilient stuff. It was sort of a neat take on the all out combo build because you go all out combo and then you end your turn with 7 mana if you whiff for the non-deterministic stuff. So there are some neat upsides there for specific metas and stuff.
I also think,
but I also don't think
it was
the meta is hurting too
held in
bad.
check somewhat by the things that have made it really good in other formats is pairing the access that green gives you with the end cores, like white cards.
Yeah.
And obviously that doesn't, I mean,
and obviously 4 of Saga and 4 of Shuko makes a very different deck than,
having
your one-ofs.
Having 3.5 artifact combo pieces that are in singleton with not that many, the creature tutors are definitely a lot better than the artifact tutors. So blue's artifact tutors in CDH, there's some density there, but they drop off pretty quickly, right? I think certainly compared to green's creature tutors. So not having the end cores that you can just find with your Worldlies, your Eladamri's Calls, your Neoforms, your Eldritch Evolutions, your Finales, your Greens, I guess not, but
all of it. Yeah,
all of it just meant that the deck was held in check compared to how it was built in those other formats, at least somewhat.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think Nadu is probably a tier 0 deck if you could just play Nomads on core in the Nadu shell in CDH. I think that very quickly broaches power level issues.
Yeah, I think it would be unquestionably a top meta deck.
Yeah, and like probably best deck in the format by a decent leg, just because just the brick rate just plummets to zero because you just like do it again in the upkeep of everybody else's
Yeah.
turn. So you never truly brick. You're just like, okay, well, I guess I'm just gonna continue comboing for the rest of the turn cycle until we get back to me, and then I win.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think, unfortunately, the bird had to go. But I think this is like a very reasonable signpost ban, and it's pretty in line with like previous bans along the same kind of thought process. And then this is the one that actually has good timing because it's pretty recent printing. People are still iffy on whether or not it would continue to stay legal.
Also, and I at the risk of getting the Karkashima players mad at me, I do think it's good if we limit the number of things that can cause absolutely absurd overlength turns. And
yeah, absolutely.
Nadu was definitely one of them. Karkashima's definitely one of them. Like, they can happen other ways, when there's 4 Ristic studies and a big counter war or whatever. But just the sheer number of actions that decks like those require people to take is just a recipe for tournament rounds going way over time.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So that is the ban list as it stands. Ban list changes as they stand. I think the big ones that we sort of want to talk about first. Well, first of all, why not Soul Ring? And we went over that a bit, but realistically, the answer is that large scale riots. It's still in every precon. Selling the Soul Ring ban is basically an impossibility. It's effectively just like the format. It's like the format pillar that Brainstorm is in Legacy, right? Is it too good for the format? Yes. Is it ever going to be banned? No. Yeah, you're just gonna have to live with it. It's sort of the soul of the format in a way. Even though you should be taking Soul Ring out of your mid power decks. And below. The other interesting ones, though, are what else we would have wanted to have seen that like actually had like a reasonable chance of being banned. Because I think that while I'm very thankful for what we ended up with, I think that we're probably missing a couple of others that I think also if they had done like 1-to-1 swaps with like a couple of these with stuff that was on the ban list changes, I think a lot more people would have been happier with it rather than incredibly angry for various reasons. I think the big ones, probably the big misses for me at least, are Ristic Study and Okra's Bowmasters. I think that they're pretty horrendous for play patterns just broadly. Like, I don't think almost any games are more fun for having had those in them, and they're like constant meta staples. I think taking them out of the format would have really helped open things up even more. And sort of like take down some of the better decks as well. But, I would also not put those off the table for, seeing potential, some potential visibility later. Maybe ban list, maybe something else.
Yeah, it honestly wouldn't shock me. I feel like, because like we had sort of a moratorium on changes. Obviously, some amount of speculation, but presumably there was a decent amount of changes that had to be made to the RC in the wake of Shell passing.
Yeah.
And like this is obviously, this is their we're so fucking back moment. So it won't shock me to see more bans, not like in the next quarterly update, but
yeah, in like the mid future.
Yeah, like earlier mid 2025. It will not shock me if they go, okay, now let's like, try some more stuff. Maybe we'll see some unbans.
Yep.
But
I wouldn't be surprised if they try unbans first and then like go back and like try more bans later, something like that.
Yeah. But boy, I think Ristic sees a lot more casual play than Bowmasters.
Yeah, for sure.
Though
I think Ristic is
popular
probably
card.
the easiest. I mean, it's probably the easiest sell out of like any card that's currently legal, though, right? In terms of just getting it banned from all aspects of the community. I feel like there's buy-in from everybody on just getting Ristic out for the most part, anyway. Obviously, there are outliers, but
I don't know. I don't know if it's like the most, but it's definitely up there in terms of like, wow, this card is pretty miserable.
yeah.
So I'm back to the old salt scores. Ristic comes in at 13th. Well, now 12th saltiest card because Nadu was above it.
Nice.
It actually comes in just above Dockside for saltiest card. It comes in above Draneth, which is I think one of the next cards on our list of things that would have been nice to see go.
Just above Draneth,
and
yeah.
I think I have to scroll down a bit, but like Orcish Bowmaster is in top 50 saltiest cards.
Or so, yeah.
So yeah, I think like Ristic Study is just in so many decks compared to a lot of these other cards. Like it's in like 5 or 6 times as many decks as Bowmasters, and like twice as many as Dockside, 4 times as many as Draneth. So like it's seeing way more play. It wouldn't shock me if you multiplied, looking at these, doing the math in my head, multiplying the average saltiness rating by occurrence rate. Ristic Study is the saltiest card in the format, and
I think it comes out
does
on
not
top
look
by a pretty large
particularly
margin there.
close, actually.
No. I think the closest you get is probably Smothering Tithe or Fierce Guardianship, but they both rank below. Anyway.
They both rank below in terms of saltiness and occurrence rate.
And occurrence, yeah.
So like, yeah, I think we might see some action on that eventually.
Yeah, I would not be surprised.
And it's another one of those
and
things
then, yeah,
that, like,
I think
decks are better than they used to be, and the better decks are, the better Ristic Study is. Like,
yeah, that's sort of the other issue is that like there's more fast mana, things are closer to or lower to the ground. There's just more stuff being cast in an average turn these days. And that just all makes Ristic Study a better card, which is like not something that you want in the format. Do you agree with Ristic and Bowmasters being like the 2 big misses? Just wanted to check, or would you put other stuff in that category as well?
I think if you're factoring in their casual ban justification, I think those are the ones, yeah, the biggest misses. I think if you're like just looking, well, I think. Do we want to just say the rest of the ones we have written down here so we can?
Yeah, sure. So I think for CDH only, actually, I broadly, like Fastest Oracle obviously is a big one. Draneth Magistrate, and then potentially Gilded Drake. Well, that one's a harder sell now, especially with Volatile Drake, Storm Drake being printed into the format.
Yeah, so I would say like Draneth, and to a lesser extent the Drakes, I think are misses.
Yeah.
Like that is like an ideological thing. Not
that's like a Caracas style ban.
A direct, yeah, like not necessarily a direct, like power level or like format impact ban. It's just like, why is a 2-mana card that says, "Don't play with the thing that makes this format this format"? Like, why does that exist?
Yeah,
and like, yeah, the ease like. Gilded Drake and Storm Drake are balanced. Like, there are lots of steal effects in the game, and overwhelmingly they suck.
Yeah,
and like
the Drakes do not.
The Drakes do not because they're balanced around a 20 life single opponent format where giving them a 3 power flyer is like a very real downside.
Like at all, yeah. Yeah, I think Thoracle actually might fit along the same lines in terms of like I think you can probably get support from all sides of the format for that one. I think it's probably even a stronger case to ban Thoracle on the basis of casual because it's just like what are you doing aside from exactly Matt Null's comedy deck, what are you doing with Thassa's Oracle that's actually interesting?
You're trying to make as many
vast
copies
majority
of it
of
as
the time
possible with Oracle. That's
yeah, as broadly, if you have a Thassa's Oracle in your like casual EDH deck, it's not a great sign. And then CDH, obviously, it helps by just opening up hate. I think we've had this discussion probably more than enough, that our listeners probably know what I'm about to say on that one. And yeah, I think Draneth and Drake are probably like the ideological casual ones, but would be probably welcomed for CDH. Maybe not the Drakes. You probably want a Drake in the format, or a Drake effect in the format, but certainly Draneth is a bit of a miserable one.
yeah. I think from a competitive perspective, you could say that Oracle's a bigger miss than either Rhystic or Bowmasters.
But I think holistically, it's sort of
like Oracle is one that like, I mean, yeah, I'm assuming if you look at Thassa's Oracle decks, like they're CDH decks, right? Like because it's just I think people who are not great at self-regulating, they understand that like Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation is like not something you can get away with.
Yeah, you don't really whoops into that one.
Yeah, like that's just like, okay, I'm playing the best, easiest, instant win the game combo in the game. Like there's no like argument for like how it's actually okay in my deck. Whereas something like a Rhystic Study is like its impact on the game is I was about to say more subtle. That's not exactly the word I'm looking for.
not quite, yeah.
It's less defined in that it doesn't just literally end the game, even if that is like what it winds up doing.
Yeah.
So like it's much more likely to be a problem that people who are just like, oh yeah, I can put good cards in my deck as long as I don't like turn it into like people who are expressly trying not to build CEDH decks will be like, well, obviously that means I can't put Oracle Consult in my deck. And like people who are saying they won't be like, oh, I can't put Mana Crypt, I can't put Rhystic Study, I can't put Dockside in my deck.
Can't put
as long as I do it quote unquote fairly.
Fairly, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we would like to see some of those be considered at some point, but it's, we'll live with the format as is. There's already enough exploration to be done. So we talked a bit about the impact on the format already. Morgan, do you want to talk about? I sort of wanted to get to one of these down here for a second, actually, because I think it's probably good to contextualize the rest of sort of what we're talking about in the grand scheme of things.
Sure, yeah, we can do that.
So I think the big one that we probably should talk about, because this is sort of a big one. Well, I guess we'll talk about both these. Is the not gameplay side of these bannings. Realistically, the big one being the economic impact on this. It cannot be ignored that 3 of the 4 bans are some of the most expensive cards that somebody is realistically going to play in their CDH deck or EDH deck broadly, and potentially is just some of the most expensive cards that somebody is likely to own, period. And that there is a large amount of money that just went up in smoke from that announcement happening. I think as of right now, I think Mana Crypt's down like 80%. I think Dockside's down probably a similar amount. And I know Jewel Lotus is effectively useless. Is effectively like worthless at this point.
What do you mean? Wasn't there that doubling cube deck that?
Yeah, for like that 1 month that had like 3 results, and I think they were Japanese results. But yeah, it's a problem. I think, unfortunately, a lot of this could have been mitigated by the RC having cojones and actually banning things when they needed to be banned and not waiting this long. to come to this conclusion, unfortunately enough. Although, you know, it's, again, good that that did happen eventually. But I definitely feel for people who, you know, put a lot of effort into putting together a deck, especially a CDH deck for like with all the real cards in it, buying all the cards for it so that they can actually enter sanctioned tournaments, and then having this swept out from under them. Definitely tough when the organizing committee for a format is separate from the like
Card
tournament
printing
running
committee,
side of things, or
tournament running.
card printing committee, so you end up with rough rough areas of interaction there. But I think there's also a lot of sentiment. So I feel, sorry, to make it clear, I feel really bad for people who, like, these are cars they worked really hard to get their hands on, and they represent a significant investment of their own personal time and savings in order to acquire those cards, and just like having that wiped out really sucks. And I wish that wasn't the way that bans had to happen, but I think that, like, that's just, unfortunately, that's just how bans work in, like, every format. This is a particularly egregious example. This might be the largest single amount of money wiped out from a ban list, like, in the history of card games, potentially. But that is just how bans work. Who I don't have sympathy for are the people who are complaining about these cards being devalued because they own 10 of each. At that point, you are now using cardboard as an investment vehicle, and you're accepting the risks that come along with them being investments. And this is just a bad beat. Sorry. You put a significant amount of money into an asset. It didn't come out the way you wanted. That sucks, but I don't feel particularly bad about that. I'm not dragging Morgan in to co-sign that opinion. I'm saying that opinion because that's my opinion, but I did want that to be clear. Like, I don't think you can be complaining about this type of stuff being wiped out if you're, like, a personal collector and, like, put money into this kind of stuff. Because obviously, if you can afford to drop, I'm not going to do the math, but for, like, probably close to 5 digits on cardboard, you can probably afford to lose a similar amount.
Also, like, I mean, okay, let's... Jewel Lotus is worthless. I guess Dockside, probably pretty worthless.
Yeah.
Mana Crypt still has some vintage demand.
I wouldn't be surprised if it rebounds in a bit of value, yeah.
So, like, but, like,
That's
I don't
not
know,
financial
collectively, a set of these 3 cards, like, we're talking about $400?
Which is a lot of money,
Which is
but,
again,
you know,
obviously, like, it sucks if you're the
Yeah.
person who was saving up and you just bought them.
yeah. Yep.
It sucks if you're the person who saved up even more and bought, like, the blingy version. But, like, I don't know. How many of those people are pro abolishing the reserve list? How many of those people, like...
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people are conceptually okay with bans having negative financial impacts on the people who like, you know, financial impacts on the people who hold
On
the
people
cards.
that aren't them.
They're just
Yeah.
not happy
Yeah.
about it being
Yeah.
them. And, like, there's an extent, if you're like, if your take is this sucks, I'm not talking about you. If your take is this shouldn't have been banned because it's not fair for the people who bought the cards, then like, this has happened so many times before, and I doubt that most people were, you know, consistent. Like, what about the people who bought, was it Sahili Felidar, where the ban list announcement came and went and they didn't ban it, and it was, like, crushing every tournament, and then, like, a week later they were like, oh, it actually won a bunch of MTGO leagues, so we're banning it. Like, how about those people who
That's brutal.
literally waited for a ban announcement and then bought the cards because it's like, oh, I guess it's not getting banned, and then got banned like a week later. Like, this stuff happens. These, you know, the risk was always there. I guess like it is a little weird given that the RC has been so stagnant that like maybe
so
people just
long,
felt
yeah.
that they weren't making changes. But like I think the other thing people have talked is I've heard the word trust thrown around a lot. And like I don't know, like it kind of sounds like people just mean I trusted that they wouldn't make changes. Like, is that the trust that was destroyed?
I think the trust was that, like, from what I've seen, and this is mostly from people who I don't think actually necessarily play a whole lot of the format. But I think a lot of the takes that I've seen have been along the lines of the assumption now, the running assumption is that the way that balance is handled, or the way that like bannings or the things that would lead to bannings are handled in EDH, are instead supposed to be handled through Rule 0. And that was just the way that it is. Even though I'm not sure there's been any explicit communication on that front, like that is the solution for like, I don't, like has that been explicitly communicated recently?
Well, I think the issue is that like a lot of it hasn't been communicated at all.
Implicit, yeah.
And like I guess this does feel like an admission that Rule 0 isn't maybe working the way they thought it would, but
I feel like that's fine, because Rule 0 has sort of always sucked.
But I guess, like, I don't know, maybe they needed to be honest about that earlier.
Prior to making the bans.
It would have been interesting. What if at the start of this year, they'd said, so we're looking at a problem where, like, deck power level is creeping up. Like, Rule 0 is great for people with established playgroups, but for people who play in less controlled environments,
which represents a larger and larger
which represents a lot of people,
EDH players,
which represents a lot of people like who go to their LGS for, you know, Commander Night, whatever. So we're like looking at making some big changes to sort of reflect the direction we, you know, want the format to take. Like, if they'd said that in January and then dropped this announcement, like, does that change the reaction?
Yeah, I wonder. I think it would probably have softened it a bit, because, like, you have a bit of an excuse, but I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
If they'd said that, would anyone who bought a Mana Crypt in the last 2 months not have bought a Mana Crypt?
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's the case, yeah. But I think it might have been. Like, I think it's a human psychological thing of, like, even though I didn't see this coming, I could have reasonably seen this coming. Which means that I get less angry about it.
I guess.
Right? I don't know. But yeah, I think that's like my opinion as of right now. I hope it doesn't sound heartless, because I really do care about like the people this actually matters to. And like, it sucks getting caught out here, especially when you either just bought them or are like heavily invested in this kind of stuff. And it sucks on the other side as well for the large amounts of ownership for like LGSs who are just like sort of stuck holding stock. This one I think hurts a bit more than usual, because it's like even a lot harder to offload these than it usually is to offload ban cards, because like usually where do ban cards go in other formats? They go to Cube and they go to Commander, right? Yeah. Just broadly. So it's sort of rough to offload these specifically, but also this is also just sort of part of doing business as an LGS. It sucks. It's a bad beat business wise, but it is just like part of doing business. Individuals absolutely sucks for.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that, like, I think that's a good frame. It's a bad beat. It's absolutely a bad beat.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
bad beats happen all the time. They're not the thing that you like. You don't run out and demand reform every time you experience a bad beat.
Yeah, every time you lose $100 to the black deck table, you're not like, or maybe maybe you are like running out with a ticket sign and doing anti-gambling, but
you like your opponent had like 2 outs and they had the nuts, and you're like, well, I guess we need to change the rules of poke, because this just It's just can't happen.
Yeah.
It's not fair.
Cool. So yeah, I sort of wanted to cap those off, or like get those mentioned. And I think we sort of covered a lot of the major stuff that we wanted to talk about. But we definitely have like a bit more left here about just like, individual stuff.
Yeah, it's been
sort of
an hour.
Impact on various formats.
It's been an hour, and now it's time to talk about how these bans will impact CEDH.
Yeah, we got through the preamble. Probably won't be that much longer, but we'll definitely have some comments on a lot of this stuff. So I think let's just like walk through probably biggest winners, biggest losers, right? Because we're talking about ban lists. Obviously, this is where you go.
Yeah.
Initially, I think the biggest winners are pretty obvious. At least like the big one and flashing lights at the top of the list is pretty obvious, which is Thrasios Timna. Turns out, when you didn't really need the Crypt that much anyway, and you weren't playing Jewel Lotus, and you couldn't play Dockside, you're pretty happy with this, broadly. The Nadu loss, actually, weirdly enough,
be revisionist and just act like Thrasios Timna has been a top meta deck the whole time.
Has always been the best deck. Yeah, absolutely.
And this is just proof that I was right the whole time.
Yeah.
I love revisionism.
I was about to say, weirdly enough, I feel like the ban that affects Thrasios Timna the most here is Nadu. Because, like, the deck, like, realistically sort of wanted to toy around with doing some, like, breakfast Nadu stuff, and it was, like, a pretty powerful card in the deck.
It was definitely an option for how to build the deck, but I don't think I was ever looking to, like, put it in my build. And
that's fair.
Like, I think my build is at least comparably... Or, like, I mean, I think my build is probably better overall, or, like, I don't know. I mean, I like it. It fits my playstyle better.
Certainly now.
No, yeah. But even before, like...
Yeah, even before, it was sort of... Yeah, I think it was probably positioned a bit better. We didn't have a huge amount of time to experiment with getting, like, Breakfast Nadu rolling in that shell. I think it probably could have been pretty great as well, but yeah, I think I mostly agree. Other big winners, sort of categorically, are basically anything that wants to play a slower game plan with a lot of artifacts and enchantments. Because holy moly, that was an entire just class of deck that Dockside killed and kept dead in the ground, buried for like years. So much so that I sort of forgot about it until like an hour after, probably not an hour, but like a while after reading the ban announcement and thinking about all the ramifications. I was like, right, there's this entire class of deck that hasn't existed for 5 years because of this one card. So cool. Maybe we'll see more of those. This is stuff like, like artifact-based stacks decks, or like sort of like mid-rangey decks that use like enchantments and that kind of stuff for like their value engines. They don't have to worry about getting blown out by Dockside much more. Sort of like incremental control-y decks also like this a fair bit, because again, you don't have to worry about the explosiveness as much. You sort of dump out as much of your stuff as you want, and you're really only exposing yourself to like Calling Ritual now, rather than like just losing the game on the spot to a 2-mana creature.
Yeah, for sure.
And then this sort of cracks open the question as well from Morgan, which is sort of like, how slow can you go with these decks? Because like, like the stuff that got banned makes the format faster, so it got banned, which means that it makes the format slower from those bans happening. But, like, the question is just how much slower?
Yeah, like, I'm interested to see, like, there are decks that can out mid-range Thrasios Timna. Like, is it that slow? Or, like, the ones that have weirdly difficult to interact with,
engines. Or, like, they generate advantage on weird axes. Yeah.
Like, are we gonna see... I mean, like my go-to for out mid-ranging was always Hullen.
Classic. Urian, although Urian's very dead now.
That one.
That one's not coming back.
But like decks that are like, so I feel like that's like this will just actually vomit out so many cards that like you will outdraw Thrasios and Tymna. And then I guess the other way of doing it is like the decks that can just like keep trying to win and it's really hard to stop them. Like stuff like Tameshi, where it's just like, oh, all my combo pieces are in my graveyard. Cool, that's not a problem.
I guess we'll try again. Yeah. Just keep going.
Like as a where like the only way to stop it is to like exile key combo pieces. Stuff like that. I mean, that one's obviously some of the low color blue stuff is like a little rough because often they were reliant on getting their commanders down early. Like I'm thinking like
which means Crypt and Jeweled Lotus,
or,
Urza,
yeah, stuff like that. But I do think some of the stuff that's maybe less looking to just jam its commander and ride that, and more built around like the engines and the cards in the deck. If the format slows down enough, might see a comeback.
Yeah, definitely. And the big one, I guess the meme answer here is that the biggest winner of all is Yuriko, because Yuriko lost basically 0 cards. I think a lot of them.
Yeah, it was reasonable to
Mana
not
Crypt,
play Crypt.
like it was just like, yeah, and it's just like, okay, well, I wasn't playing any of those cards anyway, I guess. So the big one, though, that we want to have the discussion about, and people are going to yell at us and call us washed for not mentioning first, but we are mentioning it. We're just doing it last because there's actually discussion to be had here, is Tymna Kraum. It's a weird one. Definitely a weird one. Obviously lost 3 cards out of the deck, losing Mana Crypt, Dockside, and Jeweled Lotus. Presumably not great, but also it is one of those decks that is just, the command zone is so powerful, and the main game plan is just very streamlined and efficient and just works well. And it doesn't really matter how much support you have past a certain point. That I feel like it's just going to keep rolling along sort of at the same click. I think potentially that it is going to have to evolve a bit into a different form. I think TNK will probably turn into a bit, like, even more of a sort of dedicated mid-range deck. I think making fast turns happen is going to be a bit harder, and like the Dockside, especially for like those mid-range decks where like you can't be quite as absolutely fast as you want to, or like hyper explosive where it's like I just tutor for this one card and then all my mana woes are solved. Don't really have that anymore, so you're gonna have to work a bit harder for it. But again, like, I mean, 4-colored partners mid-range, only so bad that it's gonna get, and I think that it actually survived it. It survived the bannings better than a lot of other stuff, sort of up around the same tier.
So
But Morgan
disagree.
evidently disagrees with me.
I think, first of all, I think that the Jeweled Lotus ban, I feel like people are thinking as the least impactful on the deck, and I don't actually think that's necessarily, or I guess it is, but I think they're...
So, I was about to say, like, what do you think is
it's
the
not that
least
it's
impactful one?
People went, it's the least impactful, and then discounted it, is I think what a lot of people did. And I think it's still materially impactful. And I think, like, because Tymna Kraum was a deck, I've seen it Jeweled Lotus out a lot of Kraums. I've also seen it Jeweled Lotus out a lot of Tymnas.
So many turn 1 Tymnas.
So many turn 1 Tymnas.
a lot of them.
Not having those dorks, not having the dorks to play the turn 2 Tymna, and then losing Crypt and Jeweled Lotus, means,
Kraum,
I mean,
specifically.
and kind of Opal is now really awkward.
It's definitely more awkward, yeah.
Like, I think not having those cards like takes you from turn 1 and turn 2 Tymnas to like turn 3 Tymnas a lot of the time, unless you're opening. You're either tapping out completely on turn 2 off of like one piece of fast mana, or you're playing like one piece of fast mana into a 2-mana rock and then doing that. But also, like, do you still want to play 2-mana rocks? Like, I think this is a question that I think a lot of decks are going to have to start asking themselves.
Yeah.
Of like, would I rather play a 2-mana rock on turn 2 versus like a spell that actually does something. And
Yeah,
for
it
decks
could
that
generate
don't
potential
have
cards
anything
or,
particularly great on 4 mana, like, I don't know, Tymna Kraum, I think the answer might be you just don't play the rocks. And so, like, I guess when you have your Chrome Mox or your Mox Diamond, and you
Mox
can
Diamond.
play a creature on turn 1 into a Tymna on turn 2, you're still fine. Though that does mean that your Crom is not coming out, like, forever. Unless you have, like, exactly Soul Ring, your Crom is not coming out until, like, turn 4 or 5. So, like, I think the deck's gonna be faced with some hard questions and not necessarily gonna come out of it smiling. I'd also note, if you look at a lot of particularly recent Tymna Kraum lists, so many clones. So many clones.
Oh yeah, sorry. That's a huge miss that we. This might should have gone in like our biggest losers in terms of cards, dude. Clones all time low, like so ridiculously far down the list at this point. Like Fibbage, I'm not sure that I'm like playing Fibbage in a lot of decks at this point. I think like maybe Mockingbird is fine just because it's how efficient it is and you can get it with an RCE. But like, I don't know. Are we going with Flesh Duplicate now? Like, are we playing Flesh Duplicate in decks? That seems like a lot for something that's probably not making its mana.
And I
back
think
blue.
also with no,
you also can't Dockside into blue.
Yeah,
so,
and
like,
with no Crypt to play the early One Rings, Metamorph obviously goes down a lot. Yeah, it's gonna be. I think the deck's gonna wind up looking very different, and I think the meta's gonna look different. And I think it's gonna
even
it's still gonna be a strong deck. Like I'm not tripping that hard. It's gonna be a very strong deck, but I think we might see the end of its sort of more or less unquestioned dominance.
Ubiquity, yeah. And then I guess the other one here that we should probably talk about, because we don't really have it in another category, is Rogsai. Sort of the left out I don't know, like deck here, archetype here. It's a weird one. I think my opinion, if you don't mind me sort of dumping my projection for what is sort of roughly going to happen with the deck, is that I think Rogsai definitely loses a bunch here. I think, first of all, let's just be clear. Dockside, while not that important for like the actual like early turn kills, like if you're trying to kill on turn 1, turn 2, Dockside isn't like a large contributor to that. Understandable. Dockside is a large part of how the deck plays when it gets dragged into later games. Having the mana button that you can press is a big deal. Especially versus stuff like mana stacks, which, I mean, hey, we might see more of. Turns out, when the Tritosphere isn't both feeding the Dockside and basically completely disabled by the Dockside, might be worth it to try to get that one out early. You know, could be a deal. But anyway, Dockside, definitely a big reason why that deck can play longer games, especially versus board-based interaction and like stuff that taxes mana. So it's gonna, though, windows to win in those games are going to be a lot tighter, and you might just not have the mana a lot of the time anymore. And then also, losing Crypt, big deal for the big fast deck. Fast deck that wants to win turn 1, turn 2. Losing the Crypt is a big deal. It's the best rock in the deck by like a pretty large margin, I would say. So losing that one, definitely like a big deal. Can you do busted stuff without a Crypt? Absolutely. There's still a Dark Ritual in the deck. There's still Moxen in the deck. There's still a Soul Ring. There's still a Mana Vault. Still got stuff to be doing over there. But it's got some stuff chipped out of it, and it got like some of the big players chipped out of it in like 2 of the big categories. So
especially because I think Crypt is really important.
Yeah, initially, yeah.
It's important before, like...
Oh, especially for, like, yeah.
to cast your
before
stuff.
and after Nas.
When you do Necro or Nas, like, hitting the Crypt is huge.
Yeah.
I think there's another thing that... or sorry, I guess, were you going to say, but here's why it might be good, and then I can say my piece?
Yeah.
Okay, go
I think it's not going to be... I don't think it's going to be great. But what I do think is going to happen is that the meta is going to look actually a weird amount, like it currently does right now, for the next month or so, or around there, maybe 2 months. It depends on like how fast the meta moves, and how fast people are like picking up new stuff. I think basically out of like the big, what I would call the big like four-ish decks in the format, which is like TNK, Rogsai, Sisay, and then Nadu, which is now sort of canon. They sort of fill the same slot in the meta in a weird way. They're sort of a side grade from each other. Out of those four decks, Nadu got banned, so bye Nadu. Kinnon's coming back. We'll see how that works. Kinnon losing Mana Crypt is also a bit of an issue, I would say. Sisay definitely got knocked down a peg. Rip Sisay being the best deck in the format. That's no longer the case. Dockside stripped a lot out of that deck. I think it still probably has space. Definitely not tier 1 anymore. At least not initially. So the two decks left over are TNK and Rogsai, which means that I think there's going to be a lot of momentum and inertia from people just wanting to continue playing the decks that were good when the bans happened and stayed relatively good after the bans happened. And those are mostly self-reinforcing as well, because like TNK and Rogsai metas, again, self-reinforcing. Rogsai's better with more Rogsais and like other TNKs in the pod. But I think gradually the cracks are going to start to show. Maybe not the current one. I think it like versus like, I think it's good with like 18k in the pod. I think it's probably better than like actual real interactive blue decks, because I'm not even sure that TNK pilots really mulligan for interaction that much with Rogsai decks in the pod.
Maybe I feel like they will if there's the good ones too, but
well, now, yeah, at least. But I think like Rogsai is going to hang on as like a big deck. It is probably going to pull down some wins still, as people are still unprepared for it, / trying to do like other stuff. But I think like gradually people are going to figure out that like, oh, we can actually like play mid-range decks now, and there's like these whole like swaths of decks that were previously completely invalidated that we can now explore, and like not even decks, but like just archetypes within existing decks that will gradually chip away at meta share. And then I think within like probably a couple of months, maybe a few, we'll end up in a slower meta where Rogsai is just like less of a great pick.
I think that's going to happen relatively quickly, because I think like the thing that really made Rogsai good was all the non-Rogsai turbo decks. Like, basically whether or not Rogsai is good is just a function of like how much interaction is there versus how many early wins or like threats of early wins are being presented. And like the Mardu Timna stuff, the Jund stuff, like all of this is just like gone. Like, and I think those people will be switching off of those decks like much more than like Timna Crom players or like Rogsai players. Like I think Dahada players and Timna
or like
Timna Rog and Timna Jessica, Timna Dargo, Corvold, like all of that. Those people are switching off of those decks, and so like Rogsai is just gonna run into the Cody problem, where like you're just trying to win into a wall of like everyone knows that they have to. The thing is like everyone knew they had to have something for Rogsai, and they'd get something for Rogsai, and then somebody else would do something.
Somebody else would burn it.
And it's like, shit, I have to fierce the wheel from this Timna, this like Mardu player. And then Rogsai has a window. And now they're just, I think there's going to be a lot less of that. So people are going to mulligan to interaction and then not be forced to spend it by another player. And Rogsais are just going to be going off in interaction. One other thing I think, I wanted to
think there were
say about the Dockside, like when you're talking about the Dockside in the mid and late game, I think it's especially important because like the way that deck tried to win in the mid and late game was with either like Defense Grid or Conqueror's Flail. And then they'd like put a Defense Grid on the stack, there'd be a fight over that, they'd spend some mana there, and then it's like, oh, okay, now I need to get myself back up to a game-winning amount of mana. And like the way they did that was Dockside. Where like you have 5 or 6 mana, you play Defense Grid, and then you spend blue protecting it along with like a free counter spell. It resolves, you're down to 2 mana, then you go like, cool, Dockside, here's how I'm actually winning the game. And not having that anymore is just means you have to get to like actually having 7 or 8 mana in play when you try to go off.
Without a Crypt in your deck.
Without a Crypt in your deck.
I think the one thing I wanted to say is that I think you're probably underestimating the amount of people that are just going to try to bring turbo decks anyway for the first month or so and just like make them work. And then I think it's going to fall off like pretty rapidly after they do their first event or two.
Maybe. I guess if we're talking about like whatever tournament is this coming weekend, sure.
No, I think for the next like few weeks or so, I think we'll still see like a decent spattering of like the Sans Blue Turbo stuff, but yeah, I think that'll probably get eaten away at pretty quickly. So I guess we'll talk about like a few more things here. Biggest losers: Nadu, Rip, annihilated from the surface of the planet. Bybird.
I think it would have been funny.
So we talked about this earlier.
The biggest loser.
The biggest loser. Commanders above 5 mana value. Yeah. I think there are some that you can probably... Actually, weirdly enough, I'm not sure that Tivit was even affected that much at all, because people weren't really casting Tivit anyway. They're just sort of using it as like top end.
I think
it makes it harder to do the all-in-one like Tivit plus time civ like win all-in-one turn.
Not
especially
really.
with protection, but like
because like the Tivit just refunds the mana for the time sieve.
Sure, you just have to get up to 6 in the first place to get there.
I think the reason I said above 5 mana value is because like I think above 5 mana value was where you saw a big uptick in tutoring the Jewel Lotus.
Yeah,
like 5
sure.
mana commanders would love when they had Jewel Lotus, but you would be much less likely to have them specifically tutor for Jewel Lotus for the express purpose of casting their commander, which I feel like we saw a lot with like Tivit, Atraxa, mostly.
Yep.
And just not having that
For sure.
option is like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, like absolutely. Speaking of big things that wanted Jewel Lotus, I mean, they couldn't tutor for it, but the Dino, sort of a super or a subset of the larger issue, which is Gruul's dead again. Like, just so dead. I don't know.
Yeah,
man.
in particular,
the only thing that color combination had going for it was tutoring a Dockside into play.
and I feel like it's
that's gone.
Interestingly enough, in Gruul, the Dockside is the double-ended hit, the way the Mana Crypt is in like Turbo Naz, where
for
those
sure.
decks either wanted to cast a Dockside to fuel whatever huge mana intensive thing they were going to do after, like slam the Dockside,
Just like
Tally,
incredibly overcosted effect for the color. Yeah.
But also they relied on usually setting up some sort of Dockside combo as their actual win after they did whatever crazy thing they were doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is also just sort of along the same lines. Basically, all of the Dockside combo decks just died immediately. I mean, Rip Corval, not really. Die, you stupid dragon.
Okay,
Everybody who plays the Corval deck is fine and chill. Love you guys. Guys, gals, non-binary pals. But Corval the Dragon sucks. I've always hated that deck.
Okay, here's an interesting question. All the Dockside combo decks. How does Rocco fare?
I think Rocco, weirdly enough, actually sort of fine, because I don't think it was a true Dockside combo deck anymore, at least, where like they were actually trying to piece together like Temur Sabertooth stuff with it, or like Emiel stuff with it. So I think like it might actually be okay, where you just like play this Naiad creature deck now, and you're sort of less incentivized to play a lot of the hate that had to hate out stuff like Dockside and Crypt. So like maybe you just like have more space to do the things that you actually wanted to do now. But I definitely think stuff like I mean, like I'm dropping coal like a hot potato. Sorry, dwarf buddy. I refuse for fucking Sticker Goblin to be my primary combo piece in any deck that I play. So I think coal is probably whatever, maybe playable still, but not worth the effort anymore. And just like that kind of stuff. And I don't know. I'm not coming up with any more at the top of my head because gonna be honest, if your deck required the Dockside to exist, period, I didn't really ever view it as a real deck, but you know.
Wow, you're gonna make a lot of people very upset.
I'm absolutely gonna make a lot of people very upset. I feel like I've said this before on the podcast, but you're welcome to enjoy whatever deck you want to play. I just like never viewed those things as like worth playing in a tournament context, at least. And then other biggest losers, as I mentioned, Sisay, not a massive loser. I think there's still a lot of space to work with. Still a 5-color deck, obviously. But yeah, Dockside was integral for all versions of that deck. It was basically always a Dockside combo deck in all of its forms.
Weirdly enough, I feel like
condition.
Gigantha was like the least Dockside dependent one.
Yeah, probably, honestly. But now it's sort of in a weird spot. I'm not going to go on about this for too long, but it's sort of in a weird spot now where the Chowder deck doesn't really exist because you don't have clean like in-betweens. Like, you don't have clean overlaps between your combos anymore because, like, Dockside made the MEL worth playing, which made a bunch of other stuff worth playing. So, like, you can't really justify the MEL at this point. Or maybe you can, but it's harder. And then Trad Sisay players can no longer lie to themselves about how the deck is fast because it had a Dockside in it. Because it doesn't anymore, and they have to contend with the fact that the deck was always just sort of slow if it didn't have a Dockside. And so they have to build toward, like, presumably stuff like playing, like, Breach and that kind of stuff now to actually speed up a bit. So weirdly enough, the two very different versions of Sisay have sort of started to converge, it seems like, once Dockside got banned. Which was not really a thing that I expected to happen, but makes sense in retrospect.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what, like, yeah, is Emil Derevi Cradle stuff still worth it, or
like good enough, yeah, or do you just like go into Planeswalker stuff instead because it's more like efficient in terms of mana and activations? Yeah, I don't know.
Wait, is it finally?
I'm not sure
is
that
it
I'm going to
finally
continue
time?
playing Sisay.
Is it finally time for Cultist Sisay?
I mean, people were playing Cultist Sisay already with like Amanatu Cultist for like just winning off of literally just a Dockside, but yeah. Yeah, I think TCM Biscuit was playing Cultist Amanatu so that you could, like, with 10 mana total, you could get there with the Dockside. Because you activate for Cultist, activate for Amanatu, flicker the Dockside, activate again, get MEL, go.
Sure, if your Dockside makes 1 million.
Anyway, yeah, I think the general idea from chatter players currently is like just moving over to like Bloom Tender, Faber, Elder Savala stuff with the like Saheeli and Tyvar, which I think is like not unreasonable, but is also not really where I want to be personally. So we'll see.
Cultist into Vivian. That's the
yeah. Anyway, moving on. Biggest winners. I didn't put anything down here, but actually, I guess I put Blood Moon down here. We didn't really put good things down here, but some meme stuff. Blood Moon, great winner. I don't think it's gonna be playable, but oh my god, do you not have to have the experience of Blood Mooning into immediately getting Dockside killed? You actually get to make the attempt at locking people out of mana, and it's not your fault when somebody else wins, presumably. Maybe it still is your fault a bit. And then one from special guest who wasn't on this episode, but we got some input from Lyndon Noobsors, also of the podcast, Amphibian Downpour. Oh my god. So good. Just get an entire board with it and then still don't have to care about Docksides.
True.
Do you have one here? Big winner? What's your one big winner?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know if there's a shell for it, but like Winter Orb is obviously getting a pretty big boost.
Sick. And that was our actual gut check for the episode. So that's going up in the channel after this episode goes up, and you can go and vote on those. Sorry, Morgan. Did a little bait and switch there.
Wow. Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So
Just
aside from
remember,
those, some collateral
I can
damage.
clip you. Like, oh, the
You
things I'm gonna
absolutely
make you
can.
say.
At the end of this episode, just intersperse in here. And then there were some cards, the last little section, minor section of collateral damage. So, rip to a couple of these things. The big one that I'm sad about is Chthonian Nightmare. Rip. Chthonian Nightmare is a sick card, and I wish we had a bit more time to play with it. But no Dockside means that card is not worth playing. So, whoops. Also, Oof, weirdly enough. Oof and Null Rods, just not as required anymore. So, that's sort of sick. Don't really have to make space for those, and that means that you can like play with other stacks effects as your primary stuff. I'm excited to see the stacks decks or like mid-range stacksy decks that people come up with that are not rule of law based and are not Oof and Null Rod based. Those are going to be really cool to me.
The weird thing is that I feel like those were normally ETB hate based, but that's also a lot less appealing.
Yeah, you just sort of have to care about Oracle now, which like there are other ways to deal with Oracle. You can just counter the other thing. So
Yeah. And lastly, we mentioned it before, but clones. Clone stocks in the shitter. 0 out of.
And I realized with the clone thing as well is that the reason why people were playing clones over stuff like Gilded Drake was because there were so many good ETB commanders in the format as well. And the Jewel Lotus ban also cleared all of those out. So it's like clones are like worse both because the Dockside left and because the other incidental stuff that you were looking to hit also left the format for the most part.
The worst part is, though, in our meta, I'm still going to have to play a whole bunch of clones to clone Gilded Drakes to get all my shit back.
Correct. Just play a homeward path.
In my 4-color deck? No thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And then the last little bit here is just stuff that we're excited for. I just had an open question here in case we wanted to get to anything. I'm excited to build with like a lot of decks. I think I've covered like a lot of the stuff that I'm sort of interested in over this episode. But yeah, this is the most interested I've been in CDH for a long time.
Yeah. I'm just excited to see a whole bunch of new stuff. And new stuff in realms that isn't just like it kind of felt like to play Fringe recently and do well, you had to be going like you had to be like at least like an 8 out of 10 fast.
Yeah.
And like I think it'll take a little while, but I think what we'll eventually see is slow Fringe decks making something of a return, which like I don't know, maybe this is just like a thing about my playstyle, but this is my CDH horseshoe theory, which is that as you get to actually any extreme on like one of the axes of deck building, all the decks start to converge. Like all the fastest decks, no matter how different they play, in my head, are very similar.
Yeah.
Like even if the plan, if the plan, I don't know, like back when like Lightning Druid was a deck, just to come up with an example that's like really really different, which is like get your breakfast combo or hasty Hermit Druid as fast as possible,
or a hasty Hermit Druid,
versus like Turbo Nas, like those existed at the same time. To me, any deck that's just I'm gonna try and do my thing really fast before people are set up and ready to interact with me, like that's the same game plan no matter what it is you're doing. And
yeah, it's just with different vulnerability.
Same thing with like I'm gonna try and drown everyone in card advantage, like whether that's like no matter how you're accomplishing that, or like playing some super slow control plan. Like all those decks, the more extreme you get on one axis, the game plan tends to converge. So like I don't know, I guess I just like don't see all quote unquote all the decks that are being hit really hard by the Dockside ban. Like in my head, it's like 3 decks. You know, because like I just
actually so real.
Like saying, oh yeah, the Dockside ban kills Timna Jeska, Timna Rogrek, Timna Dargo, and Dehada. It's like, cool. So that's one deck. Like,
Yeah.
so I'm like, I think we'll see the fringe decks being a lot more varied, and that should be sick because there's a lot of cool stuff. Like, I play at the CDH Discord's virtual local game store sometimes, and like people just bring out their spice, and like it's really interesting seeing what spice people come up with.
Cool stuff.
And
there,
like
right? Yeah.
whenever someone pulls out Rogsai, it's like, okay, well, I guess we're putting the spice away, and like one's pulling out something that can deal with Rogsai.
Yep.
And so I feel like we got some good stuff in store.
Abso-friggin-lutely. And I think that about wraps it up for this episode. If y'all would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at IntoTheNorthPod, via our email at IntoTheNorthPodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. Next special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work toward improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we're at patreon.com/IntoTheNorthPodcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, and to Nate Slipper for our equally lovely podcast logo. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Okay.